Hello? Is anybody out there? Send somebody. We need all spoiler recap. Hello? Send Julia Cunningham. Hurry.
You're listening to the All Spoiler Recap. I'm Julia Cunningham. Our goal of this podcast is go through a movie beat by beat, whether it is a film with low percentage of Rotten Tomatoes, a horror film, a rom-com, maybe something requested by you, or something that's trending within the top 10. And I think, why, what, I have to watch it, which is sort of the case here. My guest, Jane Arnoff Logsdon, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you so much. This is my bucket list has now been fulfilled. Well, almost. It will be soon in like an hour. Thank you, Julia. I'm so excited.
Jane, that's an unhinged response, but I'm here for it. I so appreciate that you're a passionate fan of the All Spoiler Recap, who, like many, can just email me, allspoilerrecap@gmail.com, and have you be a guest. So, Jane, thank you for reaching out, and you're a big fan. I appreciate it. So thank you for listening, too.
Julia's like, translation, you're a stalker, but you seem okay. So, yeah.
We've met on Zoom, so I'm not concerned. No, I'm kidding. It's I picked one for you, too, that I thought would be a kind of fun one because I think it just really is like a real storytelling one. It's a movie. And, we were off for a couple of weeks. I had to go see some family. I had some stuff going on that I ended up just not being able to get a movie done because, I like to watch the movie, take copious notes, watch it again, and I try and give it as much time and attention. And when I can't, I don't want to do a half-ass episode. So I apologize because I've been doing a good run, but we're back. And I just saw this past week that there was this movie that was hovering in the top 10 and then made its way to number 1 on Netflix. I think as of this morning, it was number 2 as of our week, just after we're in the first week of November, if you're listening to this down the road. And I kind of just read the description. I thought, okay, interesting plot cast. It's a movie called Don't Move. It's from Sam Raimi's production company.
Oh, Evil Dead?
Yes, like from the Evil Dead and, of course, the Spider-Man trilogy with Tobey Maguire, but has his hand in all sorts of, horror and thriller. And this is coming from his production company, but it is a true, Netflix presents type movie. So I'm always wondering, is this really a top 10 movie or is it shoved up there by Netflix? I don't know what the algorithm does, but it's a movie that stars Finn Wittrock, who you might know from the American Horror Story franchise and other various things. I always think of him as Dandy in the specific American Horror Story Freak Show, where he killed people and was obsessed with the clown, and he was this waspy killer. But yeah, Finn Wittrock, and then there's this woman named Kelsey Asbile who stars as Iris. It's kind of a two-hander, this entire movie. And she was on One Tree Hill. She was also in the series Yellowstone. She starred as Monica Dutton, which I don't watch Yellowstone, but I know people are ravenous. Yeah, they're ravenous for that series. I know her. She was also the young woman Natalie in the film Wind River, which was also from Tyler Sheridan, which was with Elizabeth Olsen and Jeremy Renner about this murder of an Indigenous woman. And she was that Indigenous woman that was murdered. And that's what the whole case is unfolding, is what happened to her. And she was so great in that. And I'm so glad that she's in this movie. She's really striking in it and really, really good, because as I get into it, you'll realize it's a lot of just relying on her. And she does such a good job. But I guess for obsessed Yellowstone fans, her character's name is Iris, but I guess we'll refer to her as Monica Dutton, even though I'm not as familiar with Yellowstone.
Julia, I love it that you do that. I love it that you pick your references. Okay.
Well, I feel like it's so much more helpful for you to remember a character an hour into my recap if it's just said actor, right? You've got it in your head.
You've got it in your head. You got the picture in your head. Yeah. So you're okay, I got the picture. Mm-hmm.
Let me help you help me, basically, with the entire podcast. So the movie begins. There's this rumbling drum and strings, just allowing you to know we're in light thriller territory. And there is thick forest. I mean, not even a gap within the trees in this overhead shot. It's deep, it's tall. There's these gray rock formations. There's cliff sides. And the rock is almost shaded to the point in this opening shot that it almost looks like a witch's face, like fresh off of Halloween. It's like these deep set eyes of rocks. There's this long, crooked looking nose within this rock, and you just know something dangerous is going to happen. And the camera pans up and up over these beautiful sun-filled rock formations. And we get this, thick forest. And the music continues to swell, where it's like this drum sort of strings, like shh, and it stops, almost like a building to a white noise. And we cut to a close-up of this woman, Monica Dutton, okay, from Yellowstone, allegedly. And she's in a tank top, seemingly in her 30s, maybe. She has some tattoos on her arm. She's got this short bob. She's got this tight nose ring hoop in, and she's absolutely beautiful. But based on our opening of the film, the light rumbling of drum, the shades of gray, she's swarmed in gray lighting. We know she's hot, but she's sad, okay? And she's laying directly under the window of her bedroom or wherever she is. And we get these like wisps of the curtain kind of slapping in the wind, and she's just watching it. We're getting the shot where she's laying down and the curtain is almost coming out over her face because the wind is hitting it. And we're getting this casual street noise bleeding in, cars zooming by, light honks. And the camera pulls out to reveal an extreme kind of close-up. It reveals that she's awake but completely still, having slept in a tank top and pajamas, lying above the covers, but she's not stiff. It almost literally is like her legs are pulled up a little bit. No, she's not dead, but it's almost like, and even not coma, it's just that like she's obviously sad or depressed, and almost where it's like she's collapsed into bed. It's almost like someone laid her there. She's just so borderline lifeless in a way. And the man further over, but in the same bed, is like tucked in like a baby, on his belly, sound asleep. It doesn't feel like anything treacherous happened or sinister. It just feels like they're on two completely different paths. And we're starting to get louder street noise of cars going by and dogs barking and things that would easily keep you up, that would keep your mind wandering, allowing you to stay awake, versus the guy who's like completely asleep and doesn't pick up on any of this. And again, it's just kind of showing like clearly she's hot, but she's sad. And she rolls over in the bed and faces, so her back is to the guy and faces the nightstand next to her. And there's this small, like red wood boat with an anchor drawn on it, like clearly a children's toy. And she leaves the room, she goes down the stairs, she quietly like digs in around a drawer, and she pulls out a pocket knife. And she has her phone, which is left charging in the wall, and she leaves and she drives off. And it's clearly a sleepy, quiet suburban area, but they're near a highway. They're near the ocean. And as she drives off, we realize, oh, she's like in Monterey, because she drives over the famous Big Little Lies Bridge, aka the Bigsby Creek Bridge, which is on Highway 1, that iconic sort of look.
Did they rename it Big Little Lies Bridge? Just kidding.
Well, I call it that for sure. I mean, again,
of course you do.
Calling it by its character name, the Big Little Lies Bridge. No one knows Bigsby Creek Bridge, Highway 1, Monterey.
Right on.
In the car on the dash is the red boat, and she's looking at it as she drives in her shades of, gold and tan Prius, like totally Monterey mom. And she starts making her way on this hike, and we're led to believe it could be a weekday. You know what I mean? Like, obviously there was heavy commuter traffic on the highway. It doesn't seem like this was a Saturday or Sunday morning necessarily, maybe a Friday type energy, but like seemingly this hike is pretty empty, and she pulls up into like a designated lot. She's the only car there. And we saw from based on her getting up, and it was so sort of gray out, almost like the sun is rising, but it's early. And she's wearing kind of like, hiking pants and sort of like a salmony, maybe a little bit darker, almost maroon base kind of colored, thin layered jacket. And she has like an Apple Watch.
I wasn't sure if she got dressed. I was like, I'm like, was she still in her tank? And Okay, so she got dressed. Okay,
She got out of
good.
PJs like in full hiking mode, hiking shoes, all of it, as
So
if
she's
like
going for a hike.
this is a routine.
Okay.
And, even though, yeah, like good question. Yeah, she wasn't full in her pajamas anymore, seemingly still sad, but enough to like put on some eyeliner. You know what I mean? Was like, I'm going to look good for my hike. Or maybe
I
it's
mean,
brat girl summer and leftover eyeliner from days of having not washed her face. You never know.
yeah, but you said hot but sad. So she's got an image to keep up. She's going to be
Exactly.
sad. She's got to stay hot.
Yeah, she's so hot. You can't fight it. So her
Right.
hike begins. And she makes her way over a series of paths and maybe off path. Like there's this giant full bed of oversized rocks. And having recently done some investing in rocks for landscaping purposes, I know that that bed of rocks that she climbs over is worth $1.2 million. Rocks are so expensive, if anyone cares to know. So she gets more into the forest rock formation that we saw from that opening sequence. And she gets to the top of this like vast valley of rock and cliffs. And it doesn't seem necessarily like a super difficult hike. It just seems like you're walking, you get pretty high up fairly quickly. And she kneels down at the base of a tree right by this area. And she picks up this framed photo of a little boy, this like school picture of a beautiful little boy who clearly died in some sort of accident there. And there are flowers, and she's looking around. There's candles there. She wipes the dust and dirt off of the frame, and she starts kind of completing already a carving in a tree with a pocket knife. And it's not like one of those things where you're like, ew, why is she carving into that tree? It's like it has carvings all over it. And it has a C plus I and below it an M, and she's kind of finishing the heart around it. And beyond her, we see in that moment that there's this orange plastic fencing that was clearly, kind of marking that this was an open area by a cliff. So we're led to believe that that boy clearly fell off that cliffside and died. They don't say it, but that's obviously that since that they've been like constructing a fence or something like that in that area. And she stands up and, we're seeing the dried flowers and there's a candle and the photograph. So it's like clearly a shrine to this beautiful little boy. And she puts the little red boat down in front of the photo. And she starts walking towards that orange fencing where part of it is slightly falling, not even like it's been yanked down. It just looks like, it's just like shoddily put up while they're trying to do construction or whatever else. And she steps over the part that has fallen some and she stares out into this vast valley. And we see this wide shot just showing like, what a blip she is on this like beautiful canvas of rock formations and forest, and she's sad, and we know exactly what's happening in this scenario. And she's holding and she's kind of gripping her own hands while she's just standing on the edge. And the camera arcs to show almost like the fish shelf, just like how high up she is and how, like this could happen. It's like a sloped rock where even where she's standing, her feet are not parallel to the ground. They're slightly on a slope, just the way the rock is formed. And you can see she's standing there because she's contemplating suicide. And there's this really ominous music that comes in when all of a sudden, out of nowhere, this voice just slices through. Really beautiful day. Wow. I heard this was a great view, but wow. And out of the corner of her eye, from the perspective of the camera shot, we see Finn Wittrock, Dandy from American Horror Story, Freak Show. And he seems to be pretty casually dressed. He's got khakis. He's in a button down. He has a wedding ring. He's got a jacket on. He's got brown boots that could be like hiking boots. And he just says, don't mind me. I'll be on my way in a minute. He sort of sits down on this rock near her, far enough away that it's not intimidating in any way, but close enough that he knows why she's kind of standing there. And he sits down and he starts eating a snack, a granola bar or whatever. And she continues to just stare forward. She doesn't even really acknowledge him. And he goes, I saw that memorial back there. Is that your... And she's like, I'm not talking about it. I'm not talking about it. Okay. And he's like, I'm Finn Wittrock. And she, and you. And she, again, is standing, on the edge. And he goes, look, you're making me nervous. If you're not going to take a step back, like at least just tell me your name. And there's just silence. And he says, I know you want to be alone. I did too. Why do you think I'm out here before the bears are even awake? And she's still silent, but clearly kind of reacting to him being there and
she wants to be
speaking.
alone. Why is he bothering her?
Well, because he sees that she's about to commit suicide. You know, he's like
Oh, come
morally.
on. Don't be so nosy, dude. Yeah, no, I get it.
And he says, I don't need you to hurt any less than you already do. I just want you to put a little space between yourself and she's like, you're not going to stop me. And there's a good amount of silence between them. And, you know, they're again like maybe 6 feet apart or so, and the wind is blowing. And he starts going into the story. He goes, you know, I used to be a car guy. Even when I couldn't afford it, I had to have the cool car, and I did. I got this Integra or whatever it was called. And he's like, and then I drove it into a wall just before graduation. And the worst part is that Chloe and I were arguing before the crash. And she looks back at him for the first time. You know, before it was just sort of out of the corner of her eye in the shot that we saw that this figure was standing there. And she looks back at him and he says, I don't even want to tell you what my last words were to her. And she fully turns towards him and she says, I'm sorry. And he's like, yeah, that's what everyone says. You know, everyone says, I'm sorry. And I couldn't move for 2 months, 2 weeks, and 4 days. I was trapped in a hospital bed when all I wanted to do was run away from myself and what I did and what had happened between us and what happened to her. And he's like, and, you know, just the I'm sorries. And she sighs and says, I don't bother saying anything. And he's like, I know, just leave the casserole and run, you know, get the hell out kind of thing. He jokes. And she laughs at that. You know, there's this kind of moment of breakthrough for them. There's this long pause. And there's this tight shot on her all of a sudden. And she says, my husband was carving our initials in that tree. And my son was looking for sticks so we could roast marshmallows. And he said he could find all the sticks he needed in under a minute. And I said he couldn't. And I was gathering wildflowers and we didn't even hear it. We didn't even hear him. And we didn't hear it. And it sort of trails into silence and she inhales and she says, the world takes what it wants. And she's nearly in tears saying this. And she says, I wish it could have taken me instead. And the part that I hate the most is that I haven't been able to cry and I haven't been able to let go. And I want to, but I'm broken. And he says, broken doesn't have to mean hopeless. It doesn't. And he gets up and he says, it wasn't exactly a pleasure, but it was nice to meet you. And she says, oh, I'm Monica Dutton from Yellowstone. And he says, I'm not going to try and change what you do next, but, you know, it's a really beautiful day out here. And he turns around and he walks away. He starts walking back down the path towards his car, wherever. And she's still just standing there staring off into the distance. But he goes down the path. And as he's walking, we all hear a stick break under her footing. And she's not far behind him. And he pauses and he turns around and she's standing there. And they end up walking back to their cars together. And they go over the bed of $1.2 million worth of rocks at least. And they get to their 2 cars and they get up to, you know, this is Big Sur. It's a designated area, the Massey Big Sur State Park. And there's this massive parking lot, but the cars are parked right next to each other, like incredibly close to each other. And it's him saying, oh, you know, I'm not really a car guy anymore, kind of laughing because it's like this really old Subaru. And of course, she has the Prius. And he says, I guess this is goodbye. And she's like, I guess this is goodbye. And he starts opening his car door and he says, you're not going to wait for me to drive off and go back there, are you? And she goes, not today. And they kind of laugh and he says, I'll take not today, and smiles while he's kind of like, I'll take it. So he gets into his car and she walks to her car and realizes like they're so close together that she can't really open her car door without it basically hitting his car. I mean, enough so that like a sliver of her hot, sad body, which is probably like 100 pounds, can't squeeze into the car. I mean, they're mirrors.
That's what I was picturing. Yeah. Where you're so close, where you're like,
the mirrors are almost touching. And so she's trying to even slither in. And like immediately, us as women, it's like the spidey sense kicks in of like, this is weirdly dangerous, even though you're in this
well,
giant...
my spidey sense kicked in like 10 minutes ago.
Well, of course, but this is where it turns and becomes dangerous.
Yes.
Like this is where you're like that. This is where it kicks into the thriller. So he leans over the console because, of course, he sees that she's, trying to get into her car. It's this slither of a space. And he taps on the window and says, "Oh, I guess I blocked you in," and kind of chuckles like, "Ha ha." And she's like, "Ha ha." And he gets out of the car. And instead of, moving a couple inches forward or whatever else, or letting her back out, he comes around the car and he's holding an umbrella. And she's like, "Expecting rain?" And he's like, "You can never be too prepared." And all of a sudden you realize now that he's come around the car. Not only are the cars so close together that even her standing straight facing him, the cars are basically touching both of her hips. Like it's that narrow of a space. And now, of course, with him walking around, she's trapped in there. So it's like, the most that you can do. It's scary. It's like, the thing you don't want to happen when you're in this type of situation. And she says, "Finn Whitrock?" Sort of like, "What are you?" And he goes, "Why do you keep calling me that?" And he lurches forward with the umbrella, and it's a stun gun. And he shocks her right in the belly.
The umbrella stun gun trick.
We cut to black.
Yikes.
Netflix presents, and the entire screen
here we go.
Goes black with that phrase in this deep, dark gray with this just off center in white. And the T even of the Netflix looks almost like a nail or a tack with a very pointed, sharp bottom. And we're getting this almost ticking like tick, 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 tick as our cards are running. And we quickly cut to her having dropped into his arms, him carrying her around the car. We cut back to the title cards of "Don't Move," our title, center of the screen, same of the T and the don't as this nail and tack in this bright white font against the black and gray. And he lays her on the ground. Her eyes are open. We cut to more credits. Him pulling something out of his pocket. We cut to more credits. Him zip tying her arms and ankles. Cut to more credits. Him placing her into the back of the car.
Ooh.
And we cut to her laying on the back of this, Subaru. And it's like an older Subaru where it's like manual rolled windows, that kind of energy. And it's the dark forest green color, but it's the small SUV. And we see her coming to as Finn Whitrock is driving. And she starts breathing heavily and is, of course, thrashing around. She starts trying to tap her Apple Watch to, of course, send out some SOS. And he says, "By all means, sure, go through the motions. There's no cellular out here. There's no emergency SOS. Too bad your phone isn't nearby with a trusted Wi-Fi connection." And she says, "My husband will for sure be looking for me." And he goes, I certainly hope so. And she goes, "Please don't do this." And he's like, "Oh, yeah, please don't do this. Don't hurt me. I have children." He's like, "What can I say? Wrong place, right time. That reminds me, I did bring you something, though. I brought you something." And he leans back and he hands her, he places right in front of her body, which is laid out, zip-tied, the red boat from Mateo, her son's little place. And he places it on the car seat in front of her body. And, she's just so wrecked by this. And she gets her hand to her pocket. And he can't see this at any point, but she pulls out that pocket knife that she had taken to carve the tree. And she starts slicing at that zip tie, but needs to keep the sound up to hide the plastic, being pulled and cut. And she's like, "Tell me more about Chloe." And he's like, "No, tell me about your son. What was his name?" She's like, "It was Mateo." he's like, why not Matthew? And she's like, why not Charlie? It's a name. And she tries to change the subject again, like, what about Chloe? Tell me more about her. And he's like, no, I know what you're doing. And I know you're trying to soften me up. And, I may have deceived you, but I spoke my truth. And she's like, okay, Finn Whitrock, speak your truth. What? And he says, I have a small place out in the woods. And she goes, what are you going to do to me when we get there? And he stares straight on and he says, I want to braid your hair. And in that moment,
What?
she gets her hands free. She lurches forward and she screams, the fuck you are, and stabs him
Go, girl.
right in the neck. He swerves the car violently, so they're swerving all over. He weaves off the road during the struggle and slams head on into a tree. Full collision, airbags. She turns to open the door, but he grabs her head. She pulls the seatbelt around his neck and is pulling it back. But because it's an old-ass Subaru, it's manual lever, so he eventually reclines his seat, which violently reclines, releasing him from her pull. They continue to struggle. She's waving her pocket knife around until they both kind of fall out of the car, both from leaning back as they're both kind of squabbling and fighting. And, she's in the way back of the car. He's in the driver's seat. So she falls out of the car in the back rear right side. He, of course, falls out in the front left driver's side. And there's this heavy breathing of her, like, and he's laid out on the other side of the car. And she rips through the zip ties on her ankles and she grabs the boat from her son that's been on the car seat. And she gets up and he says, it couldn't have been more perfect. The timing, the situation, the isolation. She's like, stay away from me. And she's holding out the pocket knife. And he goes, I can't believe I messed up and didn't check your pockets. Like, ugh.
I hate it when kidnapping goes wrong. It's such a bummer.
She's like, stay away from me. And there must be something about you, or maybe mean. I mean, like, look, half an hour ago, you were ready to end it. And now look at you. You're like full of life. And she's like, fuck you. And he stares at her and he says, have you started to feel it yet? And she's like, what? He goes, it might be hard to tell at this point given what we've been through, but she's like, what are you talking about? And he goes, system redundancy. You can never be too prepared. And he pulls a needle out of his pocket. And she's like, what is that? What did you do to me? What is that? And he's like, your body's, it's going to slow down. A special relaxant. And he's like, you're crazy. He goes, I'd be crazy not to. You have 20 minutes before you're completely paralyzed. And he starts going into more detail. He's like, at minute 1, your fine motor skills start to go. A tingling will happen. You won't be able to find or hold your knife or your phone, that kind of thing. And at minute 10, your legs will start to tingle and your gross motor skills are next. And by minute 15, your legs will give out altogether. And by 18, your breathing will be labored. And before everything shuts down, it'll be your voice. So, shall we? And she just takes off running. And he goes yelling to her, you're only going to make it worse. It's going to make it work faster. As he yells, as she's just sprinting. And she's in, the middle of nowhere. They drove off. She's not like off of a designated path. She's just running into deep, thick woods. And we hear him yelling, have your fingers started to go? And she kind of stops to collect herself and she's counting her fingers and she starts on her Apple Watch the countdown, like basically a timer of 20 minutes. And she's counting her fingers and she's remembering counting with Mateo and going through the numbers. And she takes off running again as, of course, he's starting to approach. And he's like, it'll wear off in hours and then we'll have the weekend together. And she's
wonderful.
Sprinting in her way of like, classic final girl trying to run away. And he's walking basically a la, the rain slicker fisherman. And I Know What You Did Last Summer. And yet, she's not running as fast as she thinks she is. She's starting to lose her functions. She slides down a rock formation, is literally dragging herself down further down the path into the woods deeper. She's very labored in her walking at this point, kind of lifting her legs over fallen logs and things like that. And he's, walking with a limp. He's kind of whistling. He's, just sort of like not concerned that she's run off. And she makes her way to this stream, but she's almost like can barely move at this point. She's army crawling to the other side of the stream, and he's calling out to her like, hope you found a good hiding place, and just walking around. Meanwhile, she is hiding under this massive log that's swarmed with ants, and they're crawling all over her. And she's trying to be quiet. She can't really fully functioning move her arms up to even like wave away ants. And she finally screams because there's ants all over her body. He hears her to know enough of the direction to go. And she has enough time as he's making his way towards her that she rolls her body down the side of this almost like ravine and gets into a rushing river. And he immediately screams at her because he's like at the bank of the water at this point as she's going down the river. And he's like, you won't be able to swim. But she's floating. And her entire body, low-key hot, just floating all the way down, out of danger. And we get this overhead shot of her literally going through wild rapids. And you would think like, oh, she's going to get banged around. But she is. She's thrashed through the water. She survives, though. She makes her way. And she keeps floating and basically floats into a log that is like...
She's paralyzed by now, right?
Borderline paralyzed. She can kind of move, but it's not completely loss of function. Like enough that she was able to like get her arm up enough to kind of hold herself as if not like her arms fully around it, but like wrapped on part of the log to stop herself from still floating. And she
to stop her head from being bashed on a rock or
totally. She can move her neck. Yeah. So she can enough that she could like navigate down the river, but she's laying there for a second. She gets herself to kind of, like scooch / not fully, but borderline army crawl where she has enough wherewithal to like use her upper body to pull herself. And, the timer on her Apple Watch is basically like 10 minutes has passed. So she's like close to, if you remember, full kind of being paralyzed, but she's not quite there yet. And she's kind of grunting and she gets herself up into the grass. And at this point, it's the heavy labored breathing. And it's the trying to basically gasp for air. Her head drops to the grass. She rolls on her side and she's breathing slowly as the alarm goes off. It hits the 20-minute mark. And she's just laying there. And off to the distance, we're hearing some kind of sound, almost like a lawnmower. And as it gets closer, there's this blurry man on like a riding lawnmower that's getting closer and closer to her. And, it's like sort of like Honey, I Shrunk the Kids, where it's like the fear of the lawnmower literally running over to her because he's not seeing her. He's not expecting anyone. And she's laying there. And all of a sudden the man stops and he comes up to her and he's like, you okay? And of course she can't say anything. And he walks up to her and he gets closer and he's like, can you hear me? And she does an exaggerated blink, like blink. Smart. And he goes, oh, wait, did you fall out of a kayak? Like, how did you get out here? And he's like, I'm going to roll her over. Because he can't quite see that she did that exaggerated blink yet. Because it's like, he's like looking all around for wounds, whatever. So he's like, I'm going to put you on your back. So he rolls her over. And he moves his finger from the left to the right. And her eyes follow it, of course. And he's like, okay, so you can see me. And she again over-exaggerate, like, blink. And he's like, wait, do that again. You can hear me? And she blinks. And he's like, okay, so you can hear me, you can see me. Okay, are you able to move? And she blinks twice. Blink, blink. And he's like, okay, you can see me, you can hear me, you can't move. Can you talk? And of course, she blinks twice. He's like, are you hurt? Blinks twice. I'm going to take you inside. And I'm going to call 911. And she blinks. And he gets up and he's like, hang tight, though. I've got bad knees. I can't just carry you. I'll be right back. So he goes and he gets a wheelbarrow. And he comes back and he kind of positions her up. He gets her in there. And he takes her into this like little farmhouse. And of course he's like, I didn't have this on my bingo card for sure, but okay, let's do this. And he like picks up the phone. He's about to call 911. He literally opens it up and there's a dial tone when knock, knock, knock. He looks at her and she starts blinking wildly, like danger, danger. He opens the door. Oh my God, thank God. Oh my God. And of course, it's Finn Whitrock.
Finn.
He's like, I was in a car accident and I can't find my wife. I don't know where she is. And he's like, whoa, whoa, whoa. He's like, slow down, take a breath. He's like, calm down. This is the farmer. And he's like still ranting around. He's like, have you seen anyone come by here? She's like 5'6". She's beautiful. She was on Yellowstone and in Wind River. You might have seen her.
She's hot and sad and soaked.
And he's like, hang tight. I'm going to get help. And he closes the door on Finn Whitrock. Not like, come in, sit down. He just closes the door and leaves him outside. Good
Smart.
for you, farmer. And he walks back in and he picks back up the phone. And Finn Whitrock is right behind him. And the farmer turns around and is like, I told you to stay put. And the guy's like, you know, annoyed that he's done this. And Finn's like, oh my gosh, I'm just so confused. I don't know how I got here. I just need to sit down. I just need to rest. But of course, what he's doing is looking around in the house.
I need to rest.
And he sees in the house by the kitchen this wheelbarrow, but it's empty. And so he looks at it, but he goes and he sits down on the couch. And the old man goes, look, I will help you, but we have to do it on my terms. We're going to take this outside. And Finn doesn't get up. He's like, I need to rest. And he goes, hey, I can call 911 and I can say that you need help finding your wife. Or I can call 911 and I can say I have an intruder in my home. And he clicks the phone with a dial tone. And it comes on, you know, boop, boop. Finn, master manipulator, serial killer, clearly, he starts to cry.
Oh, please.
The guy's like, what's your name? And he's like, Finn Whitrock. But of course, in this, he's like giving fake names the whole time. And he says, okay, talk. And Finn is like, oh, well, you know, my wife has mental health issues and I love her, but I'm so concerned and she's an alcoholic and she ran off and, you know, my family is going to commit her. They said if she does this again and I'm so concerned and I've literally lost her now. And the farmer's like, what's her name? And he says, Chloe. Meanwhile, Monica Dutton is under the couch right behind Finn Whitrock. We get this overhead shot of Finn on the couch and she's laying on the ground behind it, where you would only see it if you literally went and like leaned over the couch. And he goes on and on about, quote, Chloe, end quote, and how he came and she was just gone and she was really mad and they'd been in a fight. And when she has these sort of like alcoholic moments, she goes catatonic and she refuses to move or talk, you know, trying to be like, in case you ran into a woman that's like catatonic. The farmer's like, well, wow, that sounds complicated. And he goes, do you have someone? He asked the farmer and he goes, I don't talk about it. And he goes, you know, same, I guess this is why this all happens. It's like, we're not great about communicating it. And the farmer goes, you know, my wife had a heart attack and it was after years of her hounding me to take care of myself and eat better and to control my anger. And she was the one that had the heart attack. We focused on me and not her. And it's really sad. And Finn says, well, the world takes what it wants. And it's like, how dare you, quote, Monica Dutton, who's laying there paralyzed right behind you. The camera even cuts to her face for her to be like, rude.
Yeah, take my quote.
And he says, you love your wife, you know, are you going to accept this and let her just get taken away from you? And Finn's like, no. And the farmer leans forward and he goes, you know, I'm going to be straight with you. And all of a sudden, Finn like leans forward, but then there's a buzz. Bzz, bzz, bzz. Clearly someone calling him. And he puts his hand on his pocket. And he's like, oh, I'm sorry, you were saying? And the farmer's like, you said you lost your phone. It's why I needed to call. Did I? The farmer's like, yeah, you said in the wreck that you that you
Mhm.
lost it. He's like, oh my gosh, well, I'm still out of it a bit. I guess I do have it. And he's like, well, those woods are big. You better get looking. And he's like, no, wait, what were you going to tell me? No, please. And he looks back at Finn and he's like, nothing. And the farmer starts to walk away with the phone towards the door. And then Finn goes, tell me something, William. And the farmer's like, how do you know my name? I didn't tell you my name. And he goes, I read it on your mail. And do you always have your heavy gardening equipment in your kitchen? And Finn stands up off the couch. And the farmer's just staring at him like, oh, God. And he's like, where is she? And he goes, I'm sorry, I would have told you sooner. I just didn't know what to do. And she's like, where is she? And he goes, I would like you both of you two, to leave now. I'll forget this ever happened. He's like, tell me. And the farmer goes, she's in the shed out back. I took the wheelbarrow out to make room. I saw you walking up. I pulled it in with me. Finn's like, that's BS. And he's like, well, let's take a look, but give me the phone. The farmer's like, fine. So he starts walking towards him to hand him the phone, and he hands it over. And as Finn is taking it, he shoves him into the bookcase, causing it all to fall. He turns around and calls 911. This is the farmer. And he says, there's a man in my house. He's going to hurt me. And Finn's like, I'm not going to hurt you. I'm going to kill you. And he attacks the farmer. Poor William, farmer.
I know. He's really been a trooper so far, though. He's hung in. He's been smart, the farmer.
They fight. They punch. William gets some good kicks in. Finn overpowers him. He finds a loose knife on the floor during the chaos of everything falling and everything. There's like a loose, old, sort of like antique looking knife. And he grabs it and he gets the farmer's ankle. He collapses. He gets him right in the gut. And he starts stabbing the farmer over and over where there's just blood
Finn.
everywhere. Meanwhile, Monica Dutton from Yellowstone is laid out behind the couch. She's on her back. She's got her head turned, so she's seeing all this happen. The dead body of the farmer is laying literally across from her. We're talking, like if you watched ER, Lucy on one side, Carter on the other side, when the schizophrenic character Paul, played by David Krumholtz, had stabbed Lucy and Carter, and they face each other underneath. That's what's happening in Don't Move.
Intense.
But her fingers are starting to move a little bit. She's starting
that's what I was wondering.
back.
Is it wearing off? Yes, girl. Let's go.
So Finn, as he's like tearing around the house, hears through the phone that there are a couple of units on the way and to stay put. And sir, can you get on the phone? And he like throws the phone across the room, and then he goes outside and he checks the shed. He goes out there, and of course, no body because she's hiding in the house. And he picks up this bottle of gasoline out of the shed, and he takes it back inside, and he starts dumping it all over the house. The desk, the papers, the furniture on top of the dead farmer. Meanwhile, she can like fully maneuver basically one finger, and she's like tapping and breathing. And he sets the whole place on fire. Everything lights up, and she can move her hand now. And she's like, trying to like make any sort of noise to be like, oh my God, I'm actually in here. I don't want to burn alive. But he's already on the truck. He's trying to get it started. It's like stalling. Meanwhile, she gets her finger, because she can move her hand over, and gets her finger around the cord of the window shade. And it's the ones that kind of go up and down. And she starts opening and closing the window shade. And we get this shot from within the car of the fire ablaze, but the window shade closing and opening. And he finally notices, as he's like trying to get the car started, and realizes she's in there. He goes running inside. He pulls her out of the burning house. He puts her inside of the truck, sits her upright, and buckles her in. She's sort of slumped over because, again, she can like move her fingers, but not much. And he starts driving off. He brushes the hair out of her face, and he's like, do you see what you made me do? As he's driving off, he's like, I've never killed a man before, but I guess there's a first time for everything. And they keep driving, and he gets a phone call. Because again, remember, his phone was buzzing, and it like buzzes again. And he picks up, and it's this girl. She's like, Dad, I was trying to call you all morning.
Yeah, of course he's got a little girl.
hey, sweetie, how are you? And she's like, I got my report card today. And he's like, oh, yeah, how did you do? And she goes, all A's and one B. And he's like, wow, that's all amazings and one berry. And he laughs. And I don't know ages, but I do know the voice of a sullen teen. And that was definitely a teenager. And she
Oh,
says, oh, mom says we can celebrate at breakfast tomorrow. And he's like, oh, well, no, hun, not tomorrow. I'm not back home until Sunday night.
for my business trip.
She's like, Mom says we're coming up to the cabin. And he's like, oh my God, that's wonderful news. She's like, oh, here, Mom wants to talk to you. So the mom gets on the phone and he's immediately like, Lizzie, what the F? Like, if you want the best version of me, you know I need this time away. And she's like, no, I know, but this has just been happening more and more. And your daughter wants to see you. And I need a co-parent this weekend. I can't keep doing this every weekend alone. Meanwhile, Monica Dutton from Yellowstone is like, a WTF. And he's like, you're right. I'm being selfish. Come up. Let's camp. Let's celebrate. I'll see you later. And she's like, we'll be there for 10. He's like, great. I'll see you tonight at 10.
Tonight? Oh, tonight.
He's so mad. He's like whipping the car around on the road. He's so pissed. And then he realizes they're literally out of gas. So he stops at this gas station. And he literally resets his nose because it's broken. And he grabs this hat out of the glove box because this is Farmer Williams' truck. And he puts on
Right.
sunglasses and he realizes, oh, it's too much. So he puts the sunglasses on himself. He puts the hat on her, who's still like slumped over in the car. And at that point, sirens are going by because remember, units were called. There's a fire truck.
Right.
There's an ambulance. There's smoke that we can see in the distance. And she's starting to be able to move her hands a little bit. So she looks around the gas station. She, of course, is unable to communicate. And she's seeing people like go around. It's not the type of gas where you can just pump it. You have to go in and prepay. So he goes into the gas station and she's surveying the scene and she can slowly lift up her arm, but it's not enough to get to the seatbelt. And people are leaving the gas station, but more are arriving. And there's this van that stops just catty corner from them. And like a kid gets out and runs around and the dad goes inside to pay. And she gets her right hand over. And she's trying to push the button like this whole time. She finally gets the seatbelt undone.
Yay, Monica Dutton.
And the little boy comes up to the window and he's staring at her. And the mom comes up too and is like, son, like, don't do that. Don't bother her. And she sees Monica in the car. And at this point, she's gotten like the hat to have fallen and she's paralyzed and she's kind of giving eyes, but like she can't really communicate. But she gives this look to the woman, and the woman is watching her. And then Finn walks up and starts pumping the gas. And she kind of looks at them and she goes inside to her husband. And then she goes over to her car. And he sees that, you know, she has undone the seatbelt. He like rebelts her. You know, she gets in to drive off and she sees the mom sort of like, we see the mom, I should say, as they're driving off, kind of standing out clearly looking at the license plate and like on her phone. They, Finn and Monica Dunn, drive back to the car accident, the original car accident with the busted Subaru. And he tries to start his old Subaru and it doesn't start. He opens the trunk. He changes his shirt because remember, he had been stabbed by her early on. He has the broken nose and he's all full of blood from William's dead body. So he changes his shirt and he's kind of like cleaning up. And he pulls out all this stuff out of his bag, extra zip ties, a new needle. He covers them with a flannel and puts them up on the dash of William's truck. Again, she's still locked in there. And he checks in the back and, of course, is like, oh, William, you're the best, and pulls out like a towing set to pull his
Good
Subaru
job,
out.
William.
And in that moment, a cop car pulls up. She's in the car just kind of grunting. And the cop gets out of his car and comes up to the window and knocks on the window. And Finn was under his car kind of attaching the tow. So he comes out and he's like, hey, how can I help you? I'm so happy to see you. As you can see, we've had this accident. And the cop is like, I mean, someone called me about maybe a woman needing help. They provided this license plate number. Do you mind if I talk to your passenger? I need to make sure she's responsive. The woman who called was worried. And he's like, oh, well, she's drunk. And he's like, really, this early in the morning? He's like, oh, round the clock. I don't drink. It makes me sloppy. he's like, do you have ID? He pulls out his ID and he's like, well, this is expired. And he's like, oh yeah, I've been meaning to. And he's like, well, whose truck is this? It's not registered to you. And he's like, oh, it's my friend Bill's. He's like, well, can I call Bill? And he's like, of course. And the cop walks around to the Subaru and he's like, well, what happened here? And Finn is like, well, I hope you don't have to be somewhere. It's kind of a long story. And he's like, just started my shift. Tell me. And he's like, well, she crashed the car. She called me and I'm here cleaning it up. And he's like, well, why then were you both at the gas station? And he's like, oh, well, I didn't want her to like choke on her vomit. And I went to clean her up and to get more gas. And the cop is like very suspect of all of this. Like, this didn't make any sense. And he goes, why didn't you call 911 or a tow truck? And what happened to your face if you weren't in the car? Because, of course, he has the giant, basically broken nose from when the airbag went off, when he got punched by Bill, various bloodies all over him.
Yeah, it's been a busy day.
And he's like, well, and as he's kind of like trying to come up with some sort of response, Monica's been trying to roll the window down. And she gets enough that it's like, Arr! Because it's an old ass truck.
Right.
And the cop hears that and he walks over to her window, kind of leaving Finn by the toe. And he's like, ma'am, miss, are you okay? And he turns to him and he's like, what happened here? And Finn's like, well, she left me. And ever since we lost our little boy, Mateo, it's been bad. And he goes on being like, she's an alcoholic and I don't know if she'll ever come out of it. And, I didn't call because no one can save her. And he's like crying this single tear. And as he's doing this sob story, Monica starts to go, and the officer hears that she's trying to say something. He goes, I'm sorry, what? And he like walks back closer to her and he gets up to the window and she goes, help me. And he turns and he's like, step back. He turns to Finn. He's like, get back. And he pulls the flannel off of the console of the dashboard. And of course it unveils the needle and the zip ties. And as he's turning around to be like, what's going on here? Finn hits him across the head with the toe, kills him over the course of repeatedly slamming him with the heavy toe piece.
Another overkill by Finn.
He's totally dead. He puts the cop back into the cop car. He rips the radio out. He takes the gun. He puts gasoline all over it. He sets it on fire again. He looks at Monica like, God damn it. He gets back into the car with her, and as he's driving away, the cop car explodes. And we see in the shot of that kind of out of the rear view mirror, but we see that the needle is missing from the dashboard. And he says, I'm so mad at, like, just like kind of stewing. And she musters up, things aren't going the way you planned. Tomorrow's a big day. Family time. And she really starts to like drag him. She's like, when Chloe died, you were stuck in bed for 2 months. Is that when you lost your mind? And he's like, I didn't lose my mind when Chloe died. He's like, I found my clarity. I'd felt disconnected from the world until that car crash. And I can still see the angle of her neck and the way the light played off of the glass on her lap. And I felt connected, and I saw her breath, and I saw her last breath, and I felt so connected to it. And I was laying in bed over those 2 months wondering if I had felt God. And then I realized he was me. And she's like, oh my God, you're psychotic.
Looney Tunes.
And she goes, what did you say to her? You said that you felt bad about what you had said to her, but I don't think it was... I think it was when she was dying. Like, what did you say to her? And he goes, thank you. She goes, all amazings and one berry. And he's like, what? And she goes, you must love your family very much, your wife and your daughter. And, deep down, you can't keep doing this. You'll never see her again. And I know what it's like to lose a child, but you don't have to lose your child. Like, just leave me on the side of the road. And he's like, no, it's not that easy. It's not that easy. And she says, broken doesn't have to mean helpless. Remember? You said that to me. And he's like, I'm not broken. I'm not effing broken. And he whips the truck around. He's like, change of plans. And he drives off to this area, which he like then gets out of the truck and opens the gate, and he continues driving through. And it's this little boat on a jetty. It's like a single dock out on this lake. And
He's
like,
taking her on a boat?
And he's like, last stop.
Oh
Sorry,
my.
we have to skip to the ending. And it's like a tiny little rowboat. It's not like anything fancy. And she, in that moment, as he's like, this is it, she slams him in the thigh with the needle.
Yes, girl. Woo!
But she's not strong enough to push it down. And he's just sitting there staring at it. And he looks at her and he says, you know, this is it. You're going to have these small bursts of energy, but no coordination. And he pulls it out of his thigh and he pushes it so the liquid just like falls out onto the seat of the car. And she goes, why didn't you just let me do it? And he goes, kill yourself? And she goes, if this was how it was going to end, why did you stop me? And he goes, you did it yourself. It was fate. You were meant for me. And she's like, no, BS. There is no fate. There is no God. There is just us. And that means there's just a sad little man without a name. And he's like, you're angry. And she's like, I wanted to die. And he grabs her hand and he goes, wanted. And he gets out of the truck. She's screaming. He pulls a knife out of the truck in the back of his bag in the truck. And he collects her from the truck. He drags her. He zip ties her again to make sure that she can't just like run off. He drags her down. He puts her in the boat. He puts these cinder blocks in there. Remember, he's got the gun. He's got the knife. And it's like a small rowboat. And he sits her down. He starts rowing out into the middle of the lake. And he anchors it. And he, in the back, he's got the knife and the gun tucked. And below one of the benches is a cinder block. And she just like starts to cry. She's like hysterical at this point. Like, this is the end type energy. And he's like, look how far you've come. Because remember, in the beginning, when she was on the cliffside, she's like, I can't even cry. I'm like so dead. I can't even cry. And she goes, can you do one thing for me? And he turns to her. Because at this point, he's like anchoring the boat. He's getting ready to shoot her or whatever. And she goes, can you get me Mateo's boat? It's in my pocket. And he is like, fine. He like looks out of the water. He's like, whatever. So he leans forward and the boat is wobbly. He's like stepping forward in this rowboat to get up to her. And he like reaches over to one side and she's like, it's in the other pocket. He like rolls his eyes and he gets onto the other side and he leans down with like both hands to unzip her pocket and pull this toy boat out. And she goes, I'm not sorry. And she stabs him through the neck with his own knife. And it's one of those knives that's clearly like a fish gutting knife or something. So it's like slightly curved. So it literally goes in all the way, like this long knife where you see it on the other side of his throat.
Bye, Finn.
She lets go. He pulls it out of his throat. Blood is gushing everywhere. He pulls the gun out, but he's thrashing around because he can't hold his balance. She's rocking the boat. He falls into the water, dropping the gun. He's trying to climb back into the boat, so it's wobbling like crazy. She grabs the gun. She's shooting all over the place, but also gets his ankle / his leg, kind of like calf area. And then as he pulls up, right in the chest, and he falls back into the water. And she's laying there like, thank God. We could hear him thrashing around and grasping onto anything, gasping for air. And she's like heavy breathing, just laying in the boat like, the boat is taking on water because when she was just flash shooting everywhere, she also shot a giant hole into the boat. Oops. And the boat is sinking. And she's like sinking with the boat. Everything goes quiet. We get this still image of the entire lake still as all of the water has taken over and she's literally sinking down with the boat. And we see even little Mateo's boat floating in the lake. She, of course, re-emerges and flailing around with the zip-tied hands. But she swims to the tiny dock. She basically mainly has her functioning sort of like motor skills back. She gets up, she pulls herself up onto the dock, and she lays there just staring up at the sun through the clouds. She's collecting her breath. And as she looks at her hands and can see that she can move them, she starts hearing these like grunts and like heavy breaths and just like, and she realizes that he's kind of washed up on shore, similar to how she kind of like made her way back to shore. And he's laying on the embankment of like grass. And she goes over there. She walks over to him and he's gasping for air. He's coughing up blood. There's like, blood all over the rock that he's laying on. He's dying clearly. And she kicks him over with her leg. She moves him so that he's laying on his back. And he's, again, like coughing and gagging and making all sorts of weird noises as he is dying. And she looks at him and she says, "Thank you." And she turns and she starts to walk away. And she's leaving him dying. And she turns back and she watches him die. And as she watches him die and we're hearing his sort of like final breaths, we start getting this cover version of "You Don't Own Me," as famously sung at the end of First Wives Club. And it cuts to black. And that's the end. Boom, don't move.
Wow. I'm exhausted and tense.
I know. It's a kind of tight thriller.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, it reminds me of some that I've seen, but
yeah,
it's, it's twisty, and it was definitely, your telling of it also kept me on the edge of my seat.
Good. With a tight throw and also with a two-hander, it can be, but like they are genuinely good actors, like especially with her having to be, paralyzed. You've got to have like an emotive face, which she does. And she did a great job with that. Of course, it like gets into territory of like, you sort of know what's going to happen. But the whole like paralyzing thing I thought was really interesting. I like the way it kind of played out. They're both such good actors. I was sort of here for it. So it is like in the top 10 on Netflix. So you may have seen this one. I do kind of recommend. It's got like 70% on Rotten Tomatoes. So pretty decent scores. So that is Don't Move. Always, you guys, you can get in touch with me, allspoilerrecap@gmail.com. We're up on YouTube. It's always fun if you leave me a glowing review or 5 stars wherever you listen to your podcast. It's just super helpful and I would appreciate it. And Jane Arnoff Logsdon, thank you so much for being my guest.
Thank you so much for having me. This has been dreamy with a capital D. Thank you for all the amazing podcasts and having me on.
Of course, absolutely. And sorry for the short break, but we are back and I will see you again on Monday.